Welcome to Phoenix and Flame, my podcast about pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash. I'm Dana Skaggs, a psychotherapist known as the Queen of Boundaries. If you are new to Phoenix and Flame, please subscribe so you will be notified of new episodes. Visit Dana Skaggs, DanaSkaggs.com for a free quiz to discover how boundaries are impacting your life. This podcast is not intended as psychotherapy. If you are in crisis, please call 911 or contact your local crisis hotline. Welcome, friend. I'm Dana, and this is my podcast, and I'm so grateful and glad you have joined us. We have an amazing, I don't even have words. The guest that we have with us today is going to be so interesting. Her story is just fascinating. Of course, you all know that I'm very picky of who I bring onto my podcast, and I vet my guests thoroughly, and I really am excited to spend some time with our guest. Her name is Jill Sitnick. Now, Jill is an award-winning strategic thinker and educator who healed her childhood trauma-induced PTSD with psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. She has over 25 years of educational technology expertise, having worked for Bensalem Township School District, Microsoft, and Amazon. She's the founder of The Journey Sage. She is a credible voice who uses her teaching experience to demystify the process of healing PTSD with psychedelics. Jill, welcome. Welcome to Phoenix and Flame.
Oh my gosh, Dana, thank you so much. It's going to be such a fantastic conversation. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm excited. Now, you also have a memoir that I want to make sure that we have time to wrap around and talk about is Rescuing Jill, How MDMA with a Dash of Magic Mushrooms Healed My Childhood Trauma-Induced PTSD. So, Jill, I'm going to kind of let you decide where you would like to begin so that myself and my listeners can really kind of come along and kind of walk with you and understand what it was like for you, what happened, what the trauma was like, what your experience was like coming through that, what worked, what didn't work, and we'll just kind of flow back and forth until we get your whole story out here and talked about.
That was a huge opening question. Okay, let me see if I can do it super short, and then we'll go with questions from there. Okay, so
Do whatever.
Generation X, I had a abusive father, mother who was clinically depressed, attempted suicide multiple times throughout her life, hence my life. Very disruptive childhood, food insecurity, housing insecurity, thrown out of both homes, a little traumatic throughout the years, but really did not know that I just knew it was a bad childhood. I didn't really understand the extent. Okay. Fast forward 20 years, I've had a lovely long-term relationship with my partner, Carl. He passed away. 18 months after he passed away, I wound up having this crazy panic attack that I was 1,000% sure that from a little work email that my life was just going to be destroyed. The therapist with whom I had worked with my grief, I went back to her, and after a couple of months, where my body was not calming down, I was still 100% sure there was something around the corner that I couldn't see that was just going to destroy my life. She diagnosed me with PTSD because we had finally started to talk about my childhood. We had never talked about my childhood before. It was all the grief work. So we had started talking about that. And she was in a program to become a psychedelic-assisted psychotherapist. She had me go and take a look at the MAPS research, maps.org. Those are the folks who were running the clinical trials for the psychedelic MDMA for PTSD. From the clinical trials, at the time they were on the second clinical trial, 2/3 of the people in the trials didn't have PTSD symptoms by the end of the process. third journey process. We can explain that. And so I agreed to the therapy. I was kind of desperate. And very long story short, 1 year, three therapeutic journeys later, I no longer qualified for a PTSD diagnosis. And this therapy that I went through is what is in front of the FDA and slated to be approved in August. So there you go.
Wow.
How'd I do? I tried to.
You did fantastic, Jill. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm so grateful and glad that we have people out there that are really expanding the possibilities, and they have, their minds are open to what could be, instead of, sticking to the tried and true. And otherwise we're never going to be able to come up with new things and more organic things. Now let's wrap back around, because you had said something that kind of got a chord with me. Since I'm a psychotherapist, I hear these stories and different things from people. And you were talking about your experiences as a child, and I wanted to say this because I know I've gone through some things of my own, and I'm sure there's many listeners out there who are listening going, gosh, I think I might have PTSD, or, but I noticed you kind of explaining the things that you went through, and I wanted to give an opportunity to say that explaining something of what we went through is not we're not necessarily judging anyone, right? I mean, I know that and not that you were, but I know
Huh.
that when I describe things, and sometimes I'll have patients that they're trying to tell me what happened, and they're so afraid that I'm going to think that their parent
I know where you're
is
going.
this bad person. And I'm like, no, no, no. We're not about judging. We're not about painting your mom or your dad with some big bad person, black brush, or whatever kind of brush we want to paint 'em with. It's like, and because we need to have that space where we
Mhm.
can explain,
Yeah.
this happened to me. Like you said, you had food insecurity, you had housing insecurity, there's other things going on. And they're facts. We're not
Right.
trying to make anybody look bad. We're not trying to blame anybody. We're not trying to judge anybody. We're just simply saying, this was my experience, and
Mhm.
you have a right to that. Did you ever run into that when you were kind of going through that, feeling like, can I say this without feeling like I'm making my parents look bad? Or did you ever run into that at all along the way?
Well, both of my parents have passed at this point, so it's certainly not an issue now. I will be really honest. It was interesting the direction you were going there. I had very little concern about how my parents looked through the history because they wrote that history. And
Mm, I
they
love that.
unfortunately just had too much trauma on their plates to be able to change their history. I will tell you the way that my mind worked it. My shame was not about my parents. My shame was about me. I
Okay.
didn't talk about, and I found out later on that a PTSD symptom is never really talking about the incident. So, like, I didn't talk about my childhood for most of my adulthood. With the shame spiral I had was, I'm not good enough. I'm damaged goods. When people learn where I came from, they're just they're gonna write me off. I'm not good enough because I didn't have any of like the normal stories. I don't have holiday stories. I don't have the normal kind of stories that you can bond with people over. So I was always very quiet. And hence, I never got any real feedback of, oh my gosh, Jill, that was awful.
Mhm.
I assumed the feedback was going to be, oh my gosh, you must be really messed up. That's where it went with me.
I hear you, and I've heard this so much, and experienced some on my own, and also have heard other people talk about that as well, that I call it jumping in the shame shower.
Yeah. Shame
We just
spiral.
Yeah, it's just sort of like, and also you said something that made me remember why I started this podcast to begin with, was because I kept hearing people say, they would explain what they were going through, and they were in such angst, and they would look at me and they would say, "Dana, I just feel all alone."
Yes.
Because for the reasons like you just described, because they did not feel comfortable, for very good reasons at times. They did not feel comfortable sharing their details with, the average people that they were around because they were very personal details and they didn't know how they were gonna what reception those details would have with other people. So they sat with them. And so they felt so isolated.
Yeah.
And that was one of the reasons why I started Phoenix and Flame was to get people's genuine, transparent stories out there so the listeners can go, "Oh my
Hey.
gosh, her too, me too," that we're not
Yes.
alone, that there are other people walking through that.
Yeah.
Let's just hover just a moment before we move on because I'm so interested in the psychedelic side of things. That's extremely interesting to me.
Sure.
Before we get there, just kind of hovering in the PTSD space.
Oh,
So, two things I'm really interested in your take on is the sense of isolation, which you feel like that did to you, and also that sense of impending doom that tends to like you really described it very well. Like I felt like there was something around every corner that was going to just implode my life, it just kind of hovering in that fight or flight trauma response and never being able to quite pull out of that. What was that
yeah.
experience like for you as you walked that part of your journey?
Okay, so the question had 2 parts. The question had the feeling of isolation and the PTSD symptoms. I will say, I think it's really interesting, it's very astute of you to ask that question because, for the 20 some years that I was with Carl, I had my partner in crime. He regulated my nervous system. Looking back now, he regulated my nervous system. He gave me another perspective, and he was safe. And I had a really good life with Carl and working in Ben Salem, and I had a lot of friends, and it was a very safe existence. When he passed, the sense of isolation was extreme. I'm an only child. By not talking to my father mostly through my childhood. I don't have family on that side. There's very little family on my mother's side. So it was isolating in general. In addition to, and I use the word widow because it's hard to come up with another word, but we weren't married. We were partners for that long. The isolation was also a little challenging in that grief can be exhausting for friends.
Uh-huh.
Honestly, the isolation is why I went to my therapist. I was treating myself to therapy by having a place where I could unload all of those grief feelings and get some perspective. And so I'll say to anybody else out there who's feeling incredibly isolated, and if you don't like the idea of therapy, because I didn't, I had my mother's history. I was like, therapy doesn't work, right? I just treated myself to someone to listen to me. That's the way I rationalized it. So that's how
Love
I
that.
kind of got out of the isolation. The PTSD symptoms for me, moving into the actual, it all came from a work email. I was 18 months after Carl's passing. The widow's fog was starting to dissipate. Everything was on track. The job was good. The pets were fed. I had a boyfriend. Like things on the surface looked great. And this one work email came through that just, it was on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 1. And my body, my shoulders up to my ears, my back really tight, my stomach upset, not sleeping well, this constant fear, like whenever you're scared of, whether it's heights or whether it's talking in front of people, that nervousness, that fear, that's how
Mhm.
I felt all the time. I went back to my therapist because I didn't understand. My whole life, I had kind of had anxiety behaviors. To be honest with you, I thought it was another level of the grief work.
Right.
No one was more surprised than I was when my therapist said, "Let's start talking to your body. Literally, let's talk to your shoulders
Oh.
and what are they saying?" And then the childhood stuff started to come out. So, yeah, the isolation, the therapy, the physicality of the PTSD, and then the moving into discovering the origin of that physicality were childhood trauma memories.
You bring up some absolutely amazing points. Trauma is very, very physical.
Yeah.
It is in our, and I don't know if you have ever read Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. I've mentioned that book, I don't know how many times as I've been doing my podcast episodes. I've read the book
Yes.
twice. I mean, I've been a psychotherapist long enough to know when I read a book and I'm like, this guy is spot on because I've seen too many patients and I've seen it. And so it's manifest physically. So listeners,
Yeah.
if there's people out there that they don't know why they feel kind of like there's something lodged in their throat that they
Yeah.
can't
It's a
quite
good one too.
get past. Like even sometimes the voice becomes hoarse,
Hmm.
or sometimes I've noticed sometimes people when they're relatively okay until they start talking about something that's close to the trauma, and then they start having trouble swallowing. They
Yeah.
have trouble talking. And sometimes the chest will get tight and the heart will increase and the muscles, like you pointed out, the shoulder muscles get uber just hot and tight and pulled up to the earlobes. I mean, trauma is very, very physical,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why I'm really interested in your pursuit. Because and kudos to you, because there's so many people out there who don't treat themselves to someone to talk
Right.
to. And I literally was in a conversation the other day in my office, and someone said, I come here because there's really no one else in my life that I can say all this stuff to. And
Right.
I'm like, well, I'm
Right.
glad you know that this is a wonderful judgment-free zone that's confidential. You can say anything you want to about anybody in your life, about yourself. Nobody's going to know, right? And so I'm so glad that you treated yourself, and because you decided to view that, even though you came up with your mother's view and in her experience and thinking, ew, right?
Right.
You were able to reframe that and look at therapy as a way of treating yourself and put the effort into doing that. And I want to just give you kudos for that, because there's a lot of people that need it, and either they don't reframe it or they're not willing to put the effort into it. And so you not only put the effort, but I want to hear you tell us more about, okay, so you got into a therapist who was really pursuing
Hmm.
the introduction of the psychedelic side of things. So I've never done that myself, but I'm always open to new ideas, and I love to hear people's experiences of things. So
Yeah.
fill us in of what did you think when she first brought that up, and how did that progress for you and her? Was it a female?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
My therapist is female. Uh, well, so first of all, we have to go back to the Vanderkolk book because when my therapist diagnosed me with PTSD, I argued with her. I was like,
Mhm,
"Have you met me?" At that point, I was working with Microsoft. I'm corporate girl. Everything is on track. Like, "Have you met me? Come on."
mhm.
And you know, she's so patient with me. And she basically said, "Would you go read this book?" That's the book that
Oh,
showed me, "Oh, I get it now."
mhm,
I didn't believe my therapist before I read the book. So if anybody out there is kind of saying, "Hey, your body is just your body and it doesn't hold trauma," like, go read that book because
mhm.
it literally changed my mind. And I saw myself in there. I saw my parents in there. I saw myself in there. So I put that out there. And here's a phrase for you that I just heard about 2 months ago. The issues are in the tissues.
Ooh, I like it.
I wish we knew who created it. It was one of those things where, like, I heard it, so I hope I'm not, taking somebody else's phrase, but isn't that awesome?
Oh, that is awesome. I have never heard that before. And how oh, wow. That's a good one.
See, the cost of admission. There you go.
That's worth it right there.
Right there. All right, so let me see. So when I finally admitted I had PTSD, and that was a tough sell, which took an extra month, to be honest with you. That's when she shared with me that she was in this program to working with MDMA for PTSD. And I was not an experienced drug user. I tried ecstasy like once in my life. I smoked pot once in my life because for me, my brain is what got me away from my parents and got me safety, so I wasn't
Mhm.
going to ever mess with it.
Understand.
But, a couple of things. I was suicidal at that point. We're talking months into this panic attack. None of my friends, my boyfriend, nobody could calm me down. Uh, I didn't really see a purpose if this is the way life was going to be, where I had done everything I could possibly do to be safe and I still didn't feel safe. What was the point of living, to be honest?
Mm, okay.
Um, So I had that desperation going on. I saw the clinical research. She was in a program, and with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, in my experience, it's been good to have two people in the room with the patient. So she introduced me to her mentor in the program, who was a medical doctor at the time. So to me, I had my trusted therapist I was going to be working with. I had known her
Mhm.
for years at this point. I mean, not a lot of years, but years. And I had a her mentor, an expert. Remember, I came from teaching, student teaching. I totally get that whole concept. And it was a medical doctor. Like I was not going to be getting ecstasy or Molly, which might have a little bit of MDA, but could be cut with something. I was getting a medical grade quality MDMA and a medical doctor with me. And we once I made the decision, we took a couple of months preparing, and my first journey was in September.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And I want to kind of wrap back around as we're
Yeah.
doing with each other. That's a very, I love the flow. You made a point that I feel like is worth kind of hovering over for just a moment is that
Sure.
it's not particularly unusual. It's been my experience, and I heard you kind of say something similar, that when we come out of unpredictable, chaotic environments that
Uh-huh.
involve abuse and this type of thing, insecurities of various kinds, it's sometimes we come out of that with a high need for control,
Yeah.
right? Because we not joking, because we associate control with safety.
Safety.
Yes, and if we feel
Yes.
out of control, it's like I've noticed, and I've experienced that myself, and I've talked to other people that have experienced that. The people that I'm describing, and I include myself in this, have a harder time just relaxing and doing things that make you feel out of
Mm.
control, that some people that might feel very comfortable doing and enjoy doing. It's like, oh, I don't know about that, right? You're willing to go to a point, but you're like, meh, that's as far as I'm going to go, because there's that sense of I need to feel safe, and I'm not going to feel safe if I feel out of control.
Sure.
And I heard you kind of mention that a little bit. And I think that's important because you're talking about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And I'm imagining there might be some listeners that are like what I'm describing, and they're
Sure.
going, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. I would feel scared to death. I would feel very out of control. So what was the
Oh.
experience like? Because I'm very glad you talked about you had your trusted psychotherapist there with you. You had a
Mhm.
trusted MD there with you. So you were getting medical grade. So kudos to you. You're checking the boxes. You're making sure you're being your own best advocate. You're taking care
Right.
of yourself. And let's go. The next step would be the actual experience of it. I imagine
Mhm.
some people would be like, okay, I might have a trusted psychotherapist and there might be an MD right there, but you're asking me to put something in my body that's going to do weird things, and I'm not going to know what's going to happen to my body. I'm not going to have any control over it. That scares me to death. What would you say to those individuals that are having those kinds of thoughts?
I would say to those individuals that I had the exact same questions, and I probably asked my therapist and guide 1,000 questions before we went ahead. And so let's deal with some of those questions, okay?
Please.
All right. So MDMA, I my first question was I thought it was going to be like an ayahuasca experience, like an all night you throw up, you have to go to the bathroom. I was like, that doesn't sound great. Mm-mm. MDMA is a psychedelic that people actually argue shouldn't be labeled a psychedelic, which is fascinating argument that I couldn't care less about. But the reason why they argue about it is because you don't have the beautiful visuals. You are not out of your body. You are aware of your surroundings, unless you decide not to be and you put an eye mask on to just kind of relax. Um, when I was in that enhanced state, and by the way, for psychotherapy, we had a technical glitch on the second one, which was funny, but we voice recorded so 2 out of 3, two out of 3 of the journeys. I actually have the transcript, and when I was talking, I don't even didn't even slur my words. Like having like a margarita, I would sound worse. So
Interesting.
I think it's super important for people and I'm going to make this a generic comment because there's a lot of different medicines out there. There's psilocybin for depression, there's MDMA for PTSD, there's lots of research about 5-MeO, and I could go on and on. Each medicine does work differently in the body. So make sure that you understand the actual substance and the goal of that substance. In my case, the MDMA for trauma, what it does, and I'm going to use for folks who are just listening, I have my hands on my shoulders. As a trauma person in a PTSD state, my nervous system and my body was completely dysregulated. My shoulders were up to my ears. I was very tight. MDMA in that therapeutic setting with these two professionals, my body calmed down. And for the first time, in I don't know how long, I was able to say to those two people that I knew my father would try to kill me if he was in the room with us. Now, why is that important? I would never really share that before because that was a little too terrifying. My body, if there was ever a situation where I would be talking about my father, my body would kind of take over because he beat me when I was a child. And so my body remembered that. The MDMA allowed for my body to calm down, for me to literally start talking about these things that the PTSD stuff was really all about fear. My little toddler self thought that the universe was out to get me because she couldn't understand that her father, the caretaker on whom she depended,
Mhm.
was hurting her. And so MDMA really different than like a magic mushroom experience or an ayahuasca experience. And I'll just say one other thing because of your profession. The first journey, I snapped out of it after 5 hours. The therapeutic journeys with MDMA can last anywhere from 5 to 8 hours ish, an ish in there.
Okay.
I jumped out. I was immediately like awake at hour 5. I was incredibly guarded. My little inner children, adult Jill knew that I could trust these people, but little 5-year-old Jill didn't. So the
Mhm.
first journey is usually about safety. It's okay if you don't, get all of your healing goals done. It's really important that you learn as a patient that this is a safe environment for you to begin to explore that stuff. And that's usually kind of the main goal of the first journey.
I that is just such a wonderful description. I do some inner child work and internal family systems. I love
Yes,
internal family systems.
me too.
Love, love, love it. And so a lot of that has to be like if I'm doing inner child work, some regression work with somebody, something like that, that usually that first time is just because they don't know what's going to happen. But I
Yes.
go through the same protocol, the same thing every single time, and so the second time, they're calmer because they know I'm gonna say the same words, I'm gonna introduce it the same way, they're gonna go the same, and so I love the way you're describing that the younger selves that we have inside of us
Yep.
have to be able to trust and calm down that something crazy is not gonna happen.
Right.
So the 5 hours, were you in, like, her office for 5 hours? Was there, like, an exam room that you were in for 5 hours? Where was it a couch? Bring us there with you. Where were you?
Oh, all right. So when you talk about psychedelics, you very often hear set and setting. Mindset, the preparation, the months of talk therapy, the setting. So my journey room, which doesn't exist anymore, the building no longer exists, but where I went for my journey was a very, very large room with multiple seating areas, a mattress up to the side with like a pile of the biggest, fluffiest blankets you could come up with. Because what winds up happening is you should have a conversation in the very beginning, review your intentions, make sure there's no questions, be completely comfortable. Then for me, it's MDMA capsules, whatever the medicine was. And you should be able to sit or lay down, put on your eye mask if you want. I'm sure you can't tell. I'm super chatty. So so
What?
I know it's shocking. And so like my therapist and guide, I would say, well, considering the transcripts, I was looking at my phone with the transcripts. I mean, I probably talked and had conversations over 60% of the time with them because for me, it was the first time I was able to talk about this stuff with two people who would actually listen, and I wasn't terrified. But the other times, I might have been laying down. I remember my therapist knowing that there were some inner things going on because I curled up in the fetal position at one point.
Mhm.
Um, the journey room should be quiet unless there's music. Like you shouldn't hear noise. So it should
Okay.
be very quiet. It should be a beautiful, comfortable place. And you should be allowed to bring whatever you want to be comfortable, like my big fluffy socks, my big giant sweatshirt, my own eye mask, my own snacks. Like it should be, you shouldn't feel the dread of going to a hospital room. You should feel the joy of going to a very relaxing place. That's the best way I can describe a journey room.
That sounds wonderful. So once you go and you're participating in this and you're allowing yourself to open up and you're releasing these things and you're telling your younger selves are calmed down and they're telling your therapist and the guide what all the experience they're kind of like basically vomiting it up, getting it out of you is basically kind of what's
Yes.
happening. So once that's finished on that particular day and you go to leave, what
What's it like?
what are you like?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is actually super important. The entire therapeutic cycle, I was an English major, so I keep it easy. 40, 20, 40. 40% preparation, the talk therapy the months beforehand, 20% the actual journey day with the psychedelic medicine appropriate for the diagnosis. And then the last 40% is what is usually called integration because you are integrating into your life your newfound insights. For people who are like, Jill, what does that mean? I'm like, think of it like physical therapy for your brain. So I got out of that first journey. For me, 45 minutes, for me, I felt like it was 45 minutes when it was 5 hours. So you really don't remember, hence record it so you can listen back because there's some gems. You'll say things that you're like amazed that you say, right? Um, I didn't think the therapy worked. I was crying because I didn't feel any different. It took an hour. I was in my boyfriend's car. He came to pick me up. I was staring out the window because I was in this shame spiral. You called it something else. You called it shame something.
Shame shower,
I was
jumping in the shame shower.
I was in a shame shower. I had wasted these brilliant people's time. I failed. I didn't do it good enough. All shames. I was such an inconvenience. My boyfriend had to pick me up. Blah, 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 blah. It was all of a half an hour. But again, I'm in this spiral and I'm sitting in the car looking out the window, and three childhood memories just floated into my consciousness. Like when you're in the shower and you have like an idea come to your mind. I
Mhm.
had these 3 memories from when I was, like, 5 to 8 years old because, for so my mother had attempted suicide multiple times, and when I was 5, she tried to kill herself with a shotgun. What that meant, and she survived. But what that meant was during her recovery and my parents getting a divorce, and there was just lots of upheaval for me from 5 to 8. I went to different relatives. I was never in a school for an entire year. Like I was always the extra cot in the room. So that child interpreted that she was the inconvenience and she wasn't good enough to have a family, as opposed to her parents just really were not emotionally or economically able to take care of her, kind of thing. So I'm
Mhm.
in the car. I have these 3 memories. I see them from my adult perspective. And I turned to my boyfriend and I said, I think I know how this therapy works. And that's
Oh.
literally what it does. You have memories come up, you look at them from your adult perspective, and you realize all of these stories and all of these beliefs that we have were created from like 3 to 5 to 7-year olds. And I think if people would realize, like, you would never trust what a toddler says to you about practically anything, right? But yet a lot of our internal stories are from when we were a toddler. So how'd I do? Did I kind of explain it
You
so you
did
have a
fabulously.
sense?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I do. Now, this is fascinating. I I wanna make sure that the listeners that are tuning in and are just riveted by what you're saying and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, this could be something for me," right? This
Yes.
this sounds like something this sounds like a journey that I need. This sounds like a path I need to go on. Jill, where do they get more information? How do they access you? How do they where do they go?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, to be super candid, my therapy was underground and I was okay with that. because I knew the caliber of the people with whom I was working. So I will say that first, that I think a lot of people are going to choose to do this underground work. Really vet out who you're working with. On my website, I think you'll probably have the notes, thejourneystage.com. People can reach out to me, and I think I actually have some videos up on my YouTube channel about how to vet a guide. And if I don't have that, I should have that. But in reality, FDA approval is assumed in August. It'd be really surprising. This got breakthrough therapy designation in 2017. The FDA has been following very closely, so everybody would be really surprised if it didn't get approved. And then the DEA is going to probably reschedule MDMA on a bifurcated schedule. That's what everybody's guessing. Clinicians
Okay.
will be able to access MDMA, but it'll still be illegal for kind of everybody else. So I'm going to put my hands together and kind of assume that maybe by 2025, in some states, this will
Yeah.
actually be a therapeutic protocol that people can go get done. That's what it's looking like right now.
Fabulous. And I love the way you present it in terms of, going to people that are, they're educated, they're vetted, they've got whatever certification, whatever licensure, whatever, background
Yeah.
that they need, that, it might be quote unquote underground right now because it still has to go through certain, governmental approval levels, but
Right.
still, and absolutely pay. And we should do that anyway, really, regardless who we're seeing for what issue. We have
Right.
to make sure that they have the right background, that they have what kind of certifications do we feel comfortable, and so that we have to make sure that we are our own best advocate in that sense. So I love the way that you
Yes.
describe that in such an effective way.
Yes. Don't one of the things that can happen, it's funny, I just joined Third Wave's psychedelic coaching program because I'm too old. I'm not gonna become what you are. I can't go back to school for that. But I love coaching, and so there's this program, and it's interesting because they vet the people who are going into that program, because sometimes you have somebody who does 2 or 3 journeys, and suddenly they believe they can go heal everybody else. And
Got you.
it's a it is a real skill as a therapist yourself. You know you can't put your stuff onto the client. Think about when somebody's in an enhanced state, when their subconscious is literally wide
Wide
open.
open. Yep.
You really don't want to be working with someone who is working through their own stuff or puts their own opinion on you, because it can imprint. So, yeah, it's super important that you vet who you're working with. And if you're working with somebody who is new to medicine, like, you should, if you're doing medicine work, you should probably look at how much medicine work the person has done, him or herself.
Got you. Got you. Well, Jill, I wish we could talk like hours and hours more. You have really opened our eyes, and I appreciate your transparency, your willingness to kind of take us along on the
Yeah.
journey, what it was like for you and what, the some of your PTSD experiences and what PTSD felt like to you in your body. And then this very interesting, kind of cutting edge kind of treatment that really helped you and what it was like for you.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending your day, your time, and your energy with us on Phoenix and Flame. Thank you, Jill.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. I love the intelligence of the questions. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
All right, listeners, I know that you have heard Jill say things, multiple things today in this episode that you're like, Oh my gosh, I have my best friend, my coworker, my relative, my cousin needs to know exactly what Jill has to say. So take this episode and copy and paste the link in text and email, put it on your favorite social media sites. Let's grow our Phoenix and Flame community so we can reach out and we know that we are not alone. We are
Yeah.
together on this path. I hope you've had a wonderful day. I hope the rest of your day goes fabulously. I'm Dana on Phoenix and Flame.